The child was trembling. The drunk lord was laughing. And every man in that house stood and did nothing. She was a maid. She had no title, no name worth protecting, no reason to step forward. She stepped forward. The Duke saw it all. And he never forgot. If this story moves you, subscribe and leave a comment below. It means the world. The village of Ashwood lay 2 hours east of London by coach, which was far enough from the capital that gossip arrived a week late, and scandal hardly arrived at all. It was the kind of place where the hedgerows were perfectly trimmed, and the church bells rang on the quarter hour, and everyone knew, with the quiet certainty of long habit, exactly where they stood. Everyone, that is, except the woman who stepped off the mail coach on the 15th of March, 1817, carrying a single leather trunk that had seen better decades, and a composure that seemed altogether too composed for someone who had just endured 8 hours on unpaved roads. Her name, the name she gave, in any case, was Seraphina Joy. She was 24 years old, dark-haired, with hands that were too uncalloused for true poverty, and a way of observing a room that belonged to someone trained to notice things. She spoke English with a faint accent that people could not quite place, which she explained, when pressed, as the residue of a Portuguese grandmother. This was not entirely false. It was simply incomplete. The position she had come to fill was that of lady's maid and general household assistant at Moonray House, the estate of one Duke Elias Moonray. She had been recommended by a Mrs. Cecily Thorne of Bath, a woman of middling fortune and excellent connections, who had once done Seraphina a considerable kindness, and now repaid it in the form of a sealed letter of reference that described, in careful language, a woman of impeccable discretion and considerable competence. It said nothing about her family. It said nothing about where she had come from before Bath. Mrs. Thorne was nothing if not precise in her omissions. Seraphina had read the letter herself, with Mrs. Thorne's permission and a dry smile. Then she had folded it into her trunk and set off north with the particular determination of someone who has already burned the bridges behind her and sees no point in looking back at the smoke. Moonray House was older than its duke and considerably more distinguished in its bearing. It rose from the Berkshire landscape with the unhurried authority of something that had decided long ago it would outlast everything around it. 3 stories of pale stone, ivy-covered east wings, a formal garden that functioned mainly as a display of what a staff of 8 could accomplish when motivated by professional pride. And in the centre of it all, a front entrance designed to make visitors feel, the moment they arrived, that they had perhaps underestimated the scale of their own insignificance. Seraphina did not feel insignificant. She felt attentive. The housekeeper who met her at the servants' entrance was a Mrs. Haddon, a woman in her 50s with the expression of someone who had managed crises so long that tranquility now mildly alarmed her. She looked Seraphina over with the thoroughness of a customs official and appeared to find the inspection inconclusive. "You are younger than I expected," Mrs. Haddon observed. "Most people are to someone," Seraphina replied, not unkindly. A pause. Then something that might, in the right light, have been the beginning of approval. The house had a full staff of 12, not counting the groundsman, and operated on the kind of strict hierarchy that only becomes necessary when the person at the top refuses to manage anyone directly. The Duke, Mrs. Haddon explained, as she led Seraphina through the kitchen passage, did not socialize with his staff. He did not inspect rooms, correct menus, or concern himself with household logistics. He had staff for that. What he did, and the housekeeper's voice shifted here, gaining a note of something between loyalty and pity, was grieve. His wife, the Duchess Arabella, had died 4 years prior, in the summer of 1813, from a fever that had swept through the county and taken 3 other women of the parish with it. She had been 28 years old. Their son, Lord Oliver Moonray, had been 3. He was now 7, and by all accounts as vivid and warm as his father was contained and distant. Seraphina filed this information away carefully. She was good at filing things away. That first evening, She unpacked her trunk by candlelight and sat for a long moment with her hands in her lap, looking at nothing. Through the small servants' window, she could see the formal garden, pale and silver under a half moon, and beyond it, a light burning in one of the upper study windows. The Duke was awake, working, or not sleeping, or both. She thought about the life she had left, the wedding that had been arranged for her in Porto, the man twice her age with estates, and a smile that never reached whatever lived behind his eyes. She thought about the night she had walked out of her family's house with the single trunk, down the hill to the harbour, onto a ship, and into the cold grey English morning. She had been 22. She had spoken to no one from home since. She blew out the candle and went to sleep. Lord Oliver Moonray introduced himself on Seraphina's third morning at the house, appearing around the corner of the east garden wall with the abrupt confidence of someone who had never once been told that surprise was impolite. He was small for 7, with his father's dark hair and a face that seemed constitutionally incapable of withholding whatever it was feeling, which, at this particular moment, was intense curiosity. "Chi, are you the new lady's maid?" he asked, studying her with the seriousness of a magistrate. "I am. Mrs. Haddon says you are from Portugal. My grandmother was." "That is not the same thing." Seraphina looked at him steadily, 7 years old, and already practiced at precision. "No," she agreed. "It is not?" Something in her directness seemed to please him enormously. He fell into step beside her, as though the matter had been decided, trailing her along the garden path with a stream of commentary about the hedgehog he had found behind the woodshed, the Latin declensions his tutor was insisting upon, and the general injustice of being made to take a nap when he was manifestly not tired. Seraphina listened. She asked questions at the right moments. She did not talk down to him. By the end of that morning, Lord Oliver had decided she was his particular friend. He did not ask her permission. He simply announced it, with the serene certainty of a child who has not yet learned that most things must be negotiated. She did not correct him. The Duke saw this, though she did not know it. Elias Moonray had a habit, one he had never named and would not have admitted to, of standing at the upper study window in the mornings, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the garden below. He told himself it was because the light was good. He told himself other things too, but the true truth that lived underneath all the reasonable explanations, was that Oliver played in that garden, and Elias did not know how to be near him without the weight of everything he could not give the boy becoming unbearable. He had loved his wife. He had loved her with the kind of thoroughness that leaves nothing in reserve, and when she died, not slowly, not with the dignity of prepared endings, but in 3 terrible days of fever and confusion, she took with her not only herself, but his capacity to be open, to trust that the people he loved would remain. He managed the estate with precision. He sat in Parliament when required. He corresponded, administered, directed. He was by every external measure an excellent duke. He was by every internal measure a man standing on the far side of a wall he had built himself, and was no longer entirely sure he wanted to scale. Oliver did not know about the wall. Oliver simply kept arriving at the base of it, cheerful and persistent, as though the wall were an interesting feature of the landscape rather than a structural defense. And now there was this woman, this quiet, watchful, self-possessed woman, walking through his garden with his son at her side, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Elias watched her answer one of Oliver's questions, watched the boy's face light up, watched her turn back to the path with the calm of someone entirely comfortable with themselves. He looked away, set down his coffee. He had correspondence to attend to. The gathering at Moonray House on the 21st of April, 1817, was not, strictly speaking, a dinner party. The Duke had organised what his secretary described in the invitations as a small evening assembly, a gathering of 8 for supper and cards, including 2 members of Parliament, a county magistrate, and their respective wives. The sort of company that required nothing of Elias except that he be present and adequately civil. He could manage adequate civility. He had been managing it for 4 years. Oliver was not meant to attend. Oliver was 7, and his presence at evening assemblies was not, in the formal sense, appropriate. He was meant to have eaten in the nursery at 6 o'clock and been in bed by 8:30. Oliver, however, had strong opinions about what was appropriate and expressed them mainly by being somewhere other than where he was supposed to be. At 9:15, while the gentlemen were still at their port and the ladies had retired to the drawing room, Oliver appeared in the corridor outside the dining room in his nightshirt, following the sound of adult voices with the quiet single-mindedness of a small bloodhound. He found not the dining room but the antechamber, and in the antechamber he found Lord Viscount Hartley, who had excused himself from the port some 20 minutes earlier and had, in the interim, made significant inroads into a decanter of brandy that he had no particular right to be accessing. Lord Hartley was 51 years old. He was a man who, in sobriety, was merely unpleasant. In drink, he became the sort of person who found a child's obvious discomfort entertaining. Well, he said, catching sight of Oliver. The little Duke. Come to join the men, have you? Oliver took a step back. He had an instinct for wrong situations. He had not, however, been taught what to do about them. I was looking for the... Come here, boy. Let me have a look at you. You look nothing like your father, your mother, I expect, though perhaps she was rather better company. God knows he's been no fun at all these 4 years. He laughed at this. Oliver did not. The boy had gone quite still in the particular way that children go still when they are frightened and do not want to show it. Hartley took a step toward him, and then a hand came out of nowhere and closed gently, but with absolute firmness around Oliver's shoulder, drawing him back and sideways in a single smooth motion. And Seraphina Joy stepped between the Viscount and the child, with the quiet authority of someone who has already decided how this is going to proceed. She had been collecting a shawl from the upstairs room at the request of one of the lady guests. She had come around the corner and understood the situation in approximately 4 seconds. Lord Hartley, she said, with perfect composure, I believe the decanter you have there belongs in the dining room. Shall I return it for you, or would you prefer to do it yourself before the gentlemen come through? The implied alternative, that the gentleman would come through and find him with it, did not need to be stated. It hung in the air between them, clear and cold. You are a servant, he said, drawing himself up. I am, my lord, Seraphina agreed pleasantly, and it is therefore my privilege to attend to the comfort of everyone in this house, including Lord Oliver, who I believe is needed back in the nursery, if you will excuse us. She did not wait for his permission. She simply turned, one hand still resting on Oliver's shoulder, and walked him back down the corridor at a pace that was neither hurried nor slow, but that made absolutely clear the conversation was finished. Behind them, Lord Hartley stood with the decanter and the slow dawning awareness that he had been thoroughly outmaneuvered by a woman who would earn in a year what he spent on a decent horse. He put the decanter down and went back to the port. Elias had been in the corridor. He had come through from the dining room at the wrong moment, or the right one, depending on how one measured these things, and had seen the whole of it from the far end of the passage. He had seen Hartley lean toward his son. He had seen the fear in Oliver's face. He had felt, in the space of a single breath, a rage so clean and absolute that his whole body went still with it. And then, Seraphina had appeared and done, in 10 seconds, what Elias had been too far away and too slow to do himself. He stood in the corridor after they had gone, and looked at the empty antechamber and the look on Hartley's retreating back. He stood there for quite a long time. When he returned to his guests, he was composed. He was always composed, but something had shifted underneath the composure. Something had been disturbed, the way a stone at the bottom of a still pond is disturbed when something passes overhead, the water moving in patterns the surface cannot immediately reveal. Seraphina found the note under her door at 7 in the morning. It was on stationery she recognized as the good kind, thick paper, a wax seal already broken, as though whoever had written it had considered sealing it, and then decided it was too formal for the occasion, or not formal enough. The handwriting was exact and controlled, the letters giving nothing away. Miss Joy, I require a word at your earliest convenience. Please come to the morning room at 9. E.M. No title, only initials. She read it twice, then folded it and went to dress. The morning room at Moonray House was east-facing, and at 9 o'clock in late April it was full of the particular low gold light of a spring that has not yet committed itself to warmth. The Duke was standing at the window when she arrived, not sitting at the desk as she had expected, but standing, with his back to the room, one hand in his coat pocket and the other holding nothing. He turned when she came in. She had seen him at a distance since her arrival, at the edges of corridors, crossing the hall, once through the study door which had been left ajar. She had not been in the same room as him until now. He was 34. She knew this from Mrs. Haddon's detailed management of household records, which had, in passing, established the relevant ages of all senior members of the family. He was tall, with the kind of stillness that either means peace or suppression, and it was clear to Serafina within the first 10 seconds that it was the latter. There was nothing at rest in that face. There was only the appearance of rest, which was a different thing entirely, and one she recognized. "You are not going to be dismissed," he said, by way of greeting. She had not assumed she was, but she understood why he opened with it. "Thank you, Your Grace. What you did last night was—" He stopped, started again. "I wish to express my gratitude, directly." He said it as though the word gratitude was unfamiliar in his mouth, as though it had been a long time since he had needed it. Lord Oliver was not harmed, Serafina said. He was frightened, but children recover from fright quickly when they are met with steadiness. A pause. Something moved across his face that she could not name. "He has been asking for you this morning." "I know. I brought him his breakfast." The Duke looked at her. Not the way people look at servants, which is a specific kind of looking past. He looked at her the way someone looks at a problem they cannot immediately classify. "Your position here has been as lady's maid," he said. "I am considering whether it ought to be expanded, whether you might take a more formal role in Oliver's daily care, alongside his tutor." Serafina was quiet for a moment. She was calculating, not the offer, which was straightforward, but the proximity it implied, and what proximity would mean for all the things she had not said. "That would be my honour," she said finally, and meant it. "You managed Hartley very efficiently." He was not complicated to manage. The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was what a smile looks like when it is out of practice. "No," he agreed. "I don't suppose he was." She left the morning room at 9:15. She stood in the corridor for exactly 5 seconds and breathed with great deliberateness, because something had happened in that room that she had not prepared for, and she needed to categorize it before it categorized her. She could not, as yet, categorize it. She filed it instead under "Proceed with caution." The weeks that followed were, outwardly, entirely unremarkable. Serafina assumed formal care of Lord Oliver's afternoons. His lessons wound up at noon with his tutor, a fussy but genuinely learned man named Mr. Pemberton, and from 1 o'clock Serafina had him for reading, walking, French conversation, and what she called practical inquiry, which Oliver understood to mean that he was allowed to ask her any question at all, and she would either answer it or explain why she would not. He made extensive use of this policy. The Duke continued to be present in the way that a lighthouse is present, essential and illuminating from a distance, but not a place one actually goes. He appeared at dinner 3 times a week, asked Oliver about his lessons with the care of someone reading from a prepared script of fatherly interest, and then retreated back to his study or his correspondence, or whatever it was that occupied the space behind his carefully maintained exterior. Oliver, who was 7 and therefore in possession of no tact whatsoever, told Serafina one afternoon in May that his father had been sad since Mamma died, and that he thought it was maybe because Papa had loved Mamma more than he could bear. Serafina set down the book she was holding. "Who told you that?" she asked. "Nobody. I thought it out myself." He considered this. Is it possible to love someone too much, so that when they go away, it makes you less? She was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "I think that is possible. Do you think Papa will ever be more again?" She looked at this child, this extraordinary, clear-eyed, unguarded child. And she thought about walls built from grief, about the difference between damage and design, about how sometimes the most defended people are the most in need of someone who will simply refuse to leave them alone. I think some people need to remember that the world outside the wall is still there, she said carefully. They cannot be pushed, but sometimes they can be reminded. Oliver thought about this. Then he nodded with great seriousness and returned to his book. He had a talent for accepting difficult truths without requiring them to be simpler than they were. Serafina wondered where he had learned that. She suspected it was not from his father. In the second week of June, a warm week, with the Berkshire evenings going long and golden, Elias Moonray did a thing he had not done in nearly 4 years. He came to find his son, not at the scheduled dinner hour, not with the formal stiffness of the scripted questions about lessons. He came to the garden at 5 in the afternoon, when the light was honey-coloured, and Oliver and Serafina were sitting on the low stone wall beside the rose beds. Oliver reading aloud from a natural history book, while Serafina made corrections to his French pronunciation and pretended not to. The Duke stopped at the edge of the garden and watched them. Oliver looked up. His face, that open, unguarded face, did something complicated and hopeful. Papa. I am interrupting. No, Oliver said immediately. Serafina is only correcting my French and pretending she is not. You could tell us about bees. The book says they communicate by dancing, but Mr. Pemberton says that is fanciful. The Duke looked at the book. He looked at his son. Something shifted in the lines of his face, the sustained effort of containment loosening, just slightly, at the edge. Mr. Pemberton is wrong, he said, and sat down on the wall. Serafina moved along the wall to give him room. Their shoulders did not touch. They were careful. But for the next hour, the Duke of Moonray sat in his garden in the evening light and talked to his son about bees, and the language of bees, and a dozen other things that were either about nature or not about nature at all, but about the particular kind of love that has been kept in an airless room for too long and is trying, carefully, cautiously, to breathe again. Serafina said very little. She did not need to. She sat on the other side of Oliver and watched the wall come down one brick at a time, and she felt something warm and perilous and wholly unwelcome take root in her chest. She ignored it. She was very good at ignoring things. She ignored it for 3 weeks. It was a Tuesday in July when she stopped being able to ignore it. She had been up since before dawn with Oliver, who had a summer cold and was being tremendously dramatic about it in the endearing way of children who do not yet know how to distinguish between inconvenience and catastrophe. She had administered willow bark tea, a damp cloth for the fever, and 2 chapters of a pirate novel that Mrs. Haddon would have found objectionable. By 6 in the morning, the fever had broken, and Oliver was asleep, and Serafina went downstairs to the kitchen for coffee. The Duke was already there. Not in the kitchen. Elias Moonray did not come to the kitchen. He was in the small passage adjacent to it, speaking to Mrs. Haddon about something to do with the week's provisions, and he looked up when Serafina came in, and there was a moment, 3 seconds long, where neither of them said anything. He had been awake too. She could see it in him, the same quality of a long night in his face, the slight loosening of his usual precision that comes from hours without sleep. He was in his shirt sleeves, without his coat, and this small domesticity, this reminder that he was a man in a house, rather than a title performing its function, was the thing she should have been prepared for, and was not. Oliver, he asked. Fever broke an hour ago. He is sleeping. He nodded. Something in him eased, visibly, a small release of held breath, a relaxation in the shoulders. This was love, she understood, not the absent, performative love of the dinner table. This was the real kind, the frightened kind, the kind that has learned from grief that the people you love can simply stop being there, and so is never quite free from the fear that they will. Thank you, he said, simple, direct, for being with him. It is not a hardship. He is extraordinary company. A pause. Mrs. Haddon had tactfully absented herself. He told me, the Duke said, that you taught him that some questions cannot be answered, but all questions are worth asking. I believe that. It is not a conventional view. No. But conventional views are so often simply someone else's avoidance made respectable. He looked at her. The full weight of his attention, which was, she had come to understand, considerable, settled on her face with the particular quality of someone encountering a thing they cannot classify. Where did you learn that? She held his gaze. Somewhere in her chest, the warm and perilous thing she had been ignoring for 3 weeks made itself known with quiet insistence. From the process of unlearning a great many things I was taught to believe without questioning. He was quiet for a long moment. The kitchen passage was warm with the beginning of the day's heat. Somewhere outside, a thrush was constructing a very opinionated song. "Miss Joy," he said finally, and his voice had something new in it, something that cost him. "I find myself—" He stopped. The effort of continuing was visible in him. He was a man who had survived 4 years by not continuing, by stopping before the sentence arrived at its destination. "I find I am not entirely indifferent to this house when you are in it." It was the most cautious declaration she had ever heard. It was also, she thought, one of the most honest things a person had said to her in years. "Your Grace," she said, "I am a servant in your employ." "I am aware of that." "Then you are also aware that I cannot, in good conscience—" "I am not proposing anything," he said, with a precision that was almost painful. "I am merely informing you of a fact that I thought you deserved to know, as you have been nothing but honest with me." There it was, the word that landed in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. Honest. She thought about what she had not told him, about who she was, about the name that was not Joy, which was not her grandmother's name, but a translation of it. Allegria, her grandmother's surname, made English for an English country that did not ask too many questions. About the family in Porto, and the man she had fled, and the network of people who were, even now, looking for her with varying degrees of patience. She had not lied. She had been very careful never to lie, but she had omitted, extensively. "I should go check on Oliver," she said. He stepped aside. She walked past him and up the stairs and did not look back and thought, "This is going to become complicated," and was entirely right. The letter arrived on the 4th of August, 1817, and was addressed, in a hand she would have known anywhere, to a Miss Serafina Allegria da Costa, care of a forwarding address in Bath that she had believed to be entirely untraceable. She looked at it for a long time before she opened it. Her brother, not unkind, but obedient to their father in the way that second sons often are, had written to say that the arrangements made for her in 1815 had not been cancelled upon her departure. They had merely been suspended. The gentleman in question, a Senor Afonso Braga, 53 years old now, considerably patient for a man of his temperament, had recently inquired again as to her whereabouts. The family, her brother wrote, was anxious. Her father was not well. Her presence was required. There was no threat in the letter. There did not need to be. The situation was the threat. She sat with it in her lap for an hour. Then she burned it. It was Elias who noticed, in the days that followed, that something had changed. He noticed because he had, against every principle of emotional economy he had maintained since 1813, begun to pay attention to her, not conspicuously, not in any way that would have been remarked upon by the household, but with the private, involuntary attention of someone who has admitted to themselves, at last, that a particular person matters. She was still present, still competent and warm with Oliver, still precise in her manner, still the same woman who had faced down Hartley with a decanter and a raised eyebrow. But there was something behind her composure now. A tension she was working to conceal, and concealing well, except to someone who had spent considerable time studying the exact texture of her composure. He did not ask. He was not a man who asked easily, and she had made clear enough, in the kitchen passage, where the proper limits lay. But he watched, and he waited. He did not have to wait very long. It was Oliver who broke it open, because Oliver was 7 and had no patience for tension that did not need to exist. He came to Serafina one morning in the second week of August with a piece of paper in his hand and an expression of severe concern. "This was under your door and it blew into the corridor," he said. "I was not reading it, but I did read it a little. Are you going away?" It was not the letter from her brother. That was Ash. This was a second letter, arrived 2 days before, which she had not destroyed quickly enough. It was from Mrs. Thorne in Bath, warning her that a man matching the description of an agent known to work for her family had been making inquiries about a young Portuguese woman. She had run out of time. She took the letter from Oliver gently. She sat down on the corridor floor, entirely without dignity, entirely without planning. And Oliver sat down beside her, because that is what Oliver did. "You can tell me," he said. "I am very good at keeping secrets. I have kept the secret of the hedgehog for 3 months." She looked at this boy she had, without intending to, come to love with a fierceness that surprised her still. "I am not who I said I was." She told him not all of it, but enough. "My name is not Joy, it is da Costa. I am Portuguese, not merely granddaughter of Portuguese. I came here to escape something my family wanted for me that I did not want, and now they may have found where I am." Oliver was quiet for a moment. He was, she had learned, a child who thought before he spoke. "Will you have to go back?" "I will not go back," she said, "but they might make you. Only if they find me here, and only if no one can prevent it." Oliver considered this with the gravity of a small statesman. Then he stood up, brushed off his knees, and said, with absolute certainty, "Then we should tell Papa." The conversation with the Duke happened that evening. Oliver had a talent for creating facts before they could be argued with, and by 7 o'clock, Serafina was standing in the study door, and Elias Moonray was looking at her with the alert stillness of someone who already suspects the conversation is not going to be comfortable. She told him everything. Not in the calculated, selective way she had been managing information since she arrived. Everything. The family in Porto, the name, the flight in 1815, the man her father had promised her to, the 2 years building a new life from nothing in Bath, Mrs. Thorne's kindness, the forwarding address, the letters, the agent making inquiries. She stood and told him all of it with her hands still and her voice level and her eyes not looking away. Because she had decided, sometime in the corridor with Oliver, that whatever happened, she would not manage this conversation. She would simply be honest and accept the result. When she finished, there was a silence. He was sitting at his desk. He had not moved since the second minute of her account. His face was entirely unreadable. "You omitted your name." "Yes." "You omitted your country." "Yes." "What else did you omit?" She looked at him. Nothing that mattered to the work, nothing that affected Oliver, nothing that... She stopped. Started again. "Nothing that I would not have told you, when there was a reason to tell it." And what constituted sufficient reason? The word insufficient. The whole long sentence of his closed face was the word insufficient. She understood. She understood completely. She had known a man who had been betrayed by someone he loved, who had rebuilt himself around the principle of not being deceived again, and she had stood in his house and concealed her identity for 5 months. The fact that she had not lied, only omitted, was a distinction that she recognized was, in this particular moment, wholly academic. "I am sorry," she said, simply, without qualification. He did not say anything. She turned to leave. She had reached the door when he spoke. Stay. Not a request, not entirely a command. Something in between that she had never heard from him before. She stopped. Another silence. Long. The kind of silence that is a person trying to decide who they want to be. "I need to think," he said finally. "I need you to remain in this house until I have thought." She turned back around. "The agent. Leave the agent to me." 3 words, delivered with the flat certainty of someone who does not frequently make promises, but, having made one, does not break it. She returned to her room. she did not sleep. But for the first time since the letter from her brother had arrived, she was not afraid. Elias Moonray did not sleep either. He sat in his study until 2 in the morning, and then he walked through the house in the dark, not pacing, exactly, but moving through rooms, the way he had not moved through rooms since Arabella died, and every corner of the house had been full of her, and the absence of her simultaneously. He thought about what Serafina had done. He thought about it from every angle, the concealment, the letters, the name, the 5 months of selective disclosure. He thought about the way she had told him, when she told him, standing in the door of his study without flinching. He thought about the woman who had stepped in front of his son in that corridor in April without calculating the cost, who had sat on a garden wall teaching Oliver French and discussing bees, and letting him be a father in the gentle, quiet, undemanding way that had been the first thing in 4 years to make him feel like perhaps he still could be. He thought about Arabella. He thought about the betrayal he had carried since before his wife died. Not her betrayal, never hers, but someone else's. A man named Reginald Forsyth, who had been his closest friend from their years at Cambridge, who had been trusted with a matter of considerable financial and personal weight, and who had, in the winter of 1812, used that trust for his own advancement. The money had been reconstructed. The friendship had not. What had not been reconstructed, what Elias had never quite admitted was also lost, was his willingness to believe that the people he let in would stay who they had claimed to be. He thought about the difference between Forsyth and Serafina. He thought about it with the precision he applied to everything, refusing the easy comfort of a conclusion already formed. Forsyth had concealed in order to take. He had worn friendship as a mechanism for extraction. Every warmth had been instrumental. Every confidence a door held open for later use. Serafina had concealed in order to survive. She had arrived in England with nothing but courage and necessity, built a life from the ground up, and had given, to Oliver, to this household, to Elias himself, in ways he was only now naming, without once taking anything that had not been freely offered. The difference, he understood at 3 in the morning, was not technicality. It was everything. He thought about the difference between deception and concealment, between intent to harm and the desperate pragmatism of a woman who had been running from something real and had arrived in England with nothing but intelligence and will and the necessity of starting again. By 4, he had drafted 2 letters. The first was to his solicitor in London, instructing him to begin the process of applying to the Home Office for documentation that would establish Serafina da Costa, under whatever form of her name she chose to use in England, as a legal resident under the protection of the Duchy of Moonray. It was not a simple thing. It would take time and would require Elias to call in 2 favours he had been saving for significant necessity. He decided this qualified. The second letter was to a man he knew in the consular service. A man who, for the cost of dinner and a conversation, could make inquiries to the effect that a certain agent of a certain Portuguese family would find his welcome in England considerably complicated if he continued his current activities. He sent both letters by express courier before breakfast. Then he went to find Serafina. She was in the garden with Oliver, who was conducting a meticulous study of the ants beneath the rose bed in a manner that suggested it was either scientific inquiry or an extended exercise in avoidance. Elias suspected both. He came to the edge of the garden. Oliver looked up. "Papa, did you talk to Serafina?" "I am about to." "Good." Oliver returned to the ants with the satisfied air of someone whose work is done. Serafina stood slowly. She was watching him with the careful attention she brought to everything. But underneath the attention there was something new, something waiting, not for what he would give her, but for what he would be. "I have written to my solicitor," Elias said, "and to a contact at the consulate. The agent, if he is here, will be redirected. The documentation, your residency, will take some weeks, but it will be done." She was very still. "Why?" He looked at her, really looked at her, the way he had been trying not to for 4 months. Because you are not going to be made to go back to a life you chose to leave. And because... He stopped, the way he always stopped, and then, with the deliberate courage of a man doing something that terrifies him. Because I would like very much for you to remain, not as a servant, as... I am not certain of the exact formulation. I have not done this in a long time, and I was not certain I would do it again. The garden was very quiet. The morning light was the kind that makes everything look briefly perfect. Oliver had stopped pretending to study the ants. "You are certain?" she asked, not doubting him, making room for him to be certain, out loud. "I am not," he said honestly. "Certainty is not something I have as a resource. What I have is this. I have spent 4 years making myself unavailable to everything good that tried to get in. And I have watched you, for 5 months, walk through this house as though it were entirely natural to be fully present in a life. And I find that I want that, whatever that is. I want to begin." She looked at him for a long, clear moment. The warm and perilous thing in her chest, which she had been ignoring since June, unpacked itself entirely and settled. "And then let us begin," she said. From the rosebed, Oliver made a sound that was either victory or satisfaction, and probably both. What followed was not simple. Things of worth rarely are. The documentation moved through official channels with the ponderous deliberateness that distinguishes the machinery of government from everything else. And while it moved, Elias and Serafina existed in the careful, exquisite tension of two people who have declared themselves and are now discovering what that means in daily practice. It meant walks in the morning, the three of them, along the river path, Oliver between them, and then, gradually, running ahead. It meant evenings in the library. He reading, she reading, the fire between them, and no particular need for conversation except when conversation arose naturally. It meant the slow education of two people learning each other, not in the compressed urgency of courtship, but in the ordinary accumulation of days. Oliver observed all of this with the benign satisfaction of a small person who had engineered exactly the situation he wanted, and was too tactful to mention it. The agent was redirected. The consular contact had been efficient. Within a fortnight, inquiries in Bath ceased. A letter came from Mrs. Thorne saying that the matter appeared to have resolved itself with the kind of dispatch that usually indicated someone influential had involved themselves, and she hoped Serafina was well and had perhaps found a reason to remain. Serafina wrote back that she had. The rupture, when it came, arrived from an unexpected direction. Lady Thornwick, wife of the county's most prominent magistrate, treasurer of the Ashwood Ladies Society, and person of robust opinions, arrived at Moonray House on the 9th of September, 1817, unannounced, with a companion and the specific energy of someone who has heard something and has come to address it. She was received by Mrs. Haddon, who showed her to the morning room, and informed the Duke, who came down from the study with the wariness of a man who has learned that unexpected visitors rarely arrive with convenient business. Lady Thornwick was direct. She had heard, and she would not say from whom, that the Duke had a woman in his house whose origins were irregular, whose name was not what it had been represented as, and whose presence in the county was a matter that decent society might find concerning. She had come, she said, as a friend of the family and a person of conscience. She did not ask Elias to dismiss Serafina. She merely described, at length, the damage that association with a person of uncertain background might do to the Duke's reputation, and to Oliver's prospects, and to the general perception of the Moonray name. Elias listened to all of this with complete patience. Lady Thornwick was not unintelligent, and she was not malicious. She was simply a woman operating by the rules of a world that had decided the management of other people's reputations was a form of social responsibility, and she had been operating this way for 40 years and saw no reason to stop. When she finished, he said, "Lady Thornwick, Mr. Costa, Serafina, came to England 2 years ago from Portugal, where she had declined an arranged marriage with a man considerably her senior. She arrived with nothing. She built a life. She has been employed in my house since March, in which time she has been the single most significant positive influence on my son. who you have known since birth, and who you have noted, on more than one occasion, was a child requiring greater warmth than his circumstances were providing. She has been under formal legal protection since this month, arranged through my solicitor. I am aware of her background in its entirety. There is nothing irregular about her that has not been fully accounted for. Lady Thornwick blinked. This was more information than she had expected. Nonetheless, she began. I am not finished, Elias said, with the particular quiet of a man who is never louder than when he is softest. I intend to marry her. Silence. A long silence. The companion made a small sound. Lady Thornwick looked at the Duke with the expression of someone recalibrating their entire understanding of a situation. She is the woman who stepped between my son and a drunken viscount in April and removed him from the situation with more composure and effectiveness than anyone else in this house, including me. She is the woman who taught Oliver that questions are worth asking and that love is not diminished by difficulty. She is... He stopped, and in the stopping, there was something so openly human, so free of the careful containment she had observed in him for years, that even Lady Thornwick felt it. She is the first person in 4 years who made me want to be present in my own life. I will not be requiring the county's assessment of that. He said it with complete dignity, with the absolute quiet of a man who has decided he has been afraid for long enough. Lady Thornwick sat with this for a moment. She was not, at bottom, an unkind woman. She looked at the Duke, really looked at him, the way she had not looked at Elias Moonray since before he became a grief-defined abstraction. And she saw what was there. She cleared her throat. I was not aware that Lord Oliver had been, that the arrangements... Oliver is thriving, Elias said simply. Yes, Lady Thornwick agreed, and with the careful grace of a woman who is rarely wrong but knows how to accommodate the exception, I see that he is. Seraphina was told of the conversation that evening. She was also told, which was the part that required a moment of sitting down, that Elias had announced his intention to marry her to the county magistrate's wife before he had mentioned it to her. Oh, you told Lady Thornwick before you told me. I did. That is... I know. Elias... His name in her mouth. The first time she had used it, they both registered it. I have been told it was irregular, he said. By my own internal assessment, before you raise it, I was provoked. She was describing you as though you were a problem to be managed rather than... And I was not able to be measured about it. I did not calculate the order of operations. She looked at him. The man who had spent 4 years making himself unreachable, declaring himself in a morning room to a county busybody because he had been angry on her behalf. Is it what you want? She asked. Not the marriage. She understood the declaration. She meant, is it what you actually want, or is it what you said in the heat of it? He did not hesitate. It is what I want. Then yes, she said. A pause. Yes, yes, obviously. Do not make me repeat it. This time, the corner of his mouth moved, and then kept moving. It arrived, slowly and entirely, at a smile. A full one, real, unguarded. The kind that changes a face so completely it is almost like meeting a new person. He had a wonderful smile. It had been very thoroughly buried. She thought, there he is. There is the man under all of it. The wedding was small, by the standards of a duke, which is to say it had 40 guests, a soprano who came down from London, and a breakfast that the cook had been planning for 3 months. Lady Thornwick attended. She had, in the 7 months since the morning room conversation, undergone a private revision of certain positions, and she arrived with a wedding gift of extraordinary quality and a willingness to be gracious that represented, for her, a considerable personal investment. Oliver stood beside his father throughout the ceremony with the upright dignity of a boy who takes his responsibilities seriously. He had been given the position of chief witness, which was not a formal position, but which Elias had invented for the occasion, and which Oliver had accepted as entirely normal, because Oliver had a talent for accepting good things as though they were always meant to be. When the vows were finished and the register signed, Oliver reached up and took Serafina's hand. Then he took his father's hand. Then he looked at both of them with the clear, uncalculating satisfaction of a 7-year-old who has gotten exactly what he wanted and is not surprised about it at all. "Good," he said simply. And the three of them walked out of the church into the April light together. The documentation from the Home Office arrived in March, 6 months from its filing. Serafina Allegria da Costa became, in law, Serafina Joy da Costa Moon Ray, which was her husband observed with the dry precision she had come to love about him, an admirably complete name. "It covers a great deal of ground," she agreed. Her father wrote, eventually. The letter was formal and not warm, but it acknowledged her marriage and, in its way, her choice. The man in Porto had found another arrangement. Her brother sent a separate letter that was shorter and considerably more genuine, saying only that he was glad she was well and that he hoped the Duke was worthy of her. She wrote back that he was learning to be, and so was she, and that this was, she was finding, the only kind of worthiness that actually meant anything. As for Reginald Forsyth, the man who had taken Elias's trust and spent it like loose change, Elias did not forgive him. That is not how these things work. And anyone who tells you otherwise has never had a friendship used against them. But he did, in time, stop carrying the betrayal as proof that openness was foolish. Serafina had not broken his faith in people. She had, improbably, repaired it. Forsyth's shadow grew smaller by degrees, pushed back not by resolution, but by evidence, the daily accumulating evidence of a woman who had every reason to be closed and had chosen, against all practical wisdom, to remain open. He thought about that sometimes, about courage as a form of argument. In later years, when Oliver was grown and had occasion to think about the turning points of his childhood, he would describe the spring of 1817 as the season when Moonray House became a home rather than an estate. When someone decided that loving a person meant being present with them, not only protective of them from a careful distance. He credited himself considerably for facilitating this. Nobody strongly disagreed. As for Elias, he never entirely lost the contained quality, the stillness, the precision of a man who had been hurt and learned to protect himself. But the wall, the one he had built from grief and maintained with great diligence for 4 years, did not rebuild itself. It became, instead, a low garden wall, the kind one sits on in the evenings when the light goes gold and the air carries the smell of roses. He sat on it often. Serafina sat beside him, and the life that had been an estate became, properly, a home. If this story touched you, subscribe for more and leave a comment telling us your favorite moment.